John Kasich's office is here with us today. I'm so very pleased and honored to have you here. Thank you for coming, Merle. Who we have today is Merle Madrid. He serves as Director of the Public Liaison for Governor John Kasich. In his role, he oversees the governor's 6 regional offices, Constituent Affairs Department, Minority Affairs, Special Projects, and Office Outreach. Prior to joining Governor Kasich's staff, Mr. Madrid served as Political Affairs Director at Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Bruce Johnson is the Treasurer of the State of Ohio for Joseph Peters. He also served on the press. He is a native of Youngstown, Ohio, and he is a graduate of the Ohio State University.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. Kathy wanted me to let you all know, by the way, her back is feeling much better, but that doesn't mean she's looking forward to carrying all of you. So, just keep up the good work. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kathy, for the invitation to be here today. My name is Merle Madrid. I'm the Director of the Office of Public Liaison for Governor John Kasich. I'd be remiss if not to recognize a great colleague from the legislature, Representative Mike Duffy, who's here with us today, a great partner and a great leader for Worthington and the surrounding area, and a longtime friend. So, Mike, always good to see you, Representative. I was thinking last night about how to frame this. There's so much going on in Ohio, and there's so much exciting coming up in the governor's agenda as we plow ahead in trying to continue the rebound that our state has been on for the past 3 years. And actually, I'm not making this up, I dreamt about what to say last night, and it was much funnier in my dream than it will probably be today. But I was thinking of it this way. Back in 100 years ago, late 1800s, early 1900s, Ohio was it, man. We elected 7 presidents. We had the biggest clout in Congress. Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, inventors, the Goodyear. I mean, everything was happening here. There wasn't one night that passed. We didn't have a date, right? We were the belle of the ball. We were the state everybody wanted to be. We were where all the action was. And over time, we kind of got complacent, right? We kind of let things go a little bit. We think about it like an old house. Didn't keep up the kitchen, maybe let some of the plumbing go, and didn't repaint the walls every day. Kind of let things go a little bit, and kind of let ourselves go a little bit, to the point where in 2010, we were a state that was $8 billion in deficit in our budget. We were a state that had lost 350,000 private sector jobs in the previous 4 years, and we were a state that had 89 cents in our rainy day fund. Okay, think about that. That's the state savings account. That's if anything happens that we're not counting on, how do we pay for it? 89 cents. We were broke. Not only were we broke, we were $8 billion behind. And you think about a restaurant. If a restaurant's struggling to get clients, to get customers to come through the door, restaurant doesn't raise its prices. Restaurant changes its menu. Restaurant cuts its prices. Restaurant tries to bring in more customers, because you don't make your restaurant stronger by raising prices on the people who are there. Because guess what? Then they leave too. You bring in new customers, and that's what we've done here in Ohio. In the past 3 years, the private sector in this state has created 170,000 new jobs. Our budget is balanced, and our rainy day fund is full. $1.5 billion in reserve. That's the maximum allowed by law. How do we do that? Well, we took everything apart. And Representative Duffy can talk more about what the legislature did. But the legislature, working with the governor, took every aspect of state government and said, if it wasn't how it is now, if we were creating it new today, what would it look like? And that's not rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? That's structurally taking apart government and saying, why doesn't it work? Private sector has come through this recession and is coming out of it now leaner, more responsive, and turning a profit. Why does government take longer? I think we all know the inherent built-in factors of government, but taking it apart and looking at it that way and saying, if we could start now, what would we do? So one of the first things we did with leadership from the House was eliminate the state's inheritance tax. The death tax is gone in this state. If you're a small business owner, a farmer, you pass away, you don't see the undertaker and the tax man on the same day. You can leave that wealth for your next generation, for your family. Why is that important? We don't go to Naples and Siesta Key and Sarasota just because of the weather. Now, on a day like today, the weather's a really good reason to go. But as people get toward retirement and they think about where do they want to have their wealth, where do they want their money to be, it's in a state like Florida that has no income tax. Okay, there are reasons beyond the weather why $12 billion in wealth has left this state over the past 18 years for states that have no income tax. And when I say that, that's not just Florida, which is warm. That's not just Texas, which is, Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. That's places like the Dakotas. Lower income taxes is where our wealth has gone. And think about what $12 billion means. That's not just $12 billion that could have gone into the state for taxes. Okay, that's $12 billion. That's those $2 that sergeant just did a heck of a job getting out of every one of your pockets. That's next week when the school has a food drive, when the Girl Scouts are selling cookies, when the church needs a new roof. That's $12 billion that should be here, that isn't here anymore because it's gone to places with lower taxes. So we have worked tirelessly to bring Ohio's income tax down. It is now down to 5.3% at the top bracket, and in the next few weeks, the governor wants to roll out a plan that will get it under 5%. Make us more competitive with our Midwestern states that surround us, and make Ohio a destination for businesses and a place for entrepreneurs to grow. But it's about a lot more than that. It's about a lot more than tax policy, because tax policy is like, that's, if you're baking a cake, that's the flour, right? That's like you got to have it, but you need a lot of other things to make it go too. We've got a state in which 24,000 kids a year drop out of high school before they graduate. 24,000 lives going nowhere. We have over 1 million adults in this state who don't have a high school degree. The stats are there. I could bore you with them. I'll bore you with other things instead of stats, though. Those people who find themselves in that position are in a dead end. They're going nowhere fast. And what does that mean for all of us as society, business owners? That's a workforce that isn't there when we need to hire somebody, right? That's a family, maybe a young mother who needs assistance. Now, we don't want to pull the safety net out from under those who need it, but we want to say, use the safety net to bounce back. Get back in the game. And so, as part of next week's rollout of the mid-biennium review, a major policy initiative the governor will work on with the legislature over the coming months, we want to incentivize businesses to take time out of your day. Go into a high school. Mentor those young people. Bring those people out of the high school and bring them into your business. Kroger does a great job of this at their corporate headquarters down in Cincinnati. They get one student a day, so it's 5 students throughout the week. So you got 5 kids whose lives are changing because they take a couple hours out of that day, they leave the classroom, they go to Kroger, and they're not bagging groceries, they're not stocking the shelves, they're going into the corporate offices, working with corporate executives, seeing how the world works in real time. And look, I was never a great student. I'm a political science and communications major because math and algebra and science were never my thing. I wish they were. I really do. I wish I was an engineer. I wish I was a welder, honestly. You'd be making a lot of money sitting here on hours if you were a welder. Or a plumber. We've got to focus on vocational education. But you got to find out what it is that drives a kid. And we know, working with parents, business community, the faith community, educators, education policy, we know the things that work. We all have ideas about what it is we want to do, but none of us are empowered necessarily to do it. We've got to get a system in this state that empowers everybody to come to the table and be part. Because a kid doesn't just get dropped off at school at the beginning of the day and leave at the end of the day, and that's it. They're out of society, they're out of our life, they're out of our mind, right? Parents don't think like that. We shouldn't think like that. We've got to give the teachers the tools. We've got to give the business community and private sector and the faith-based community the tools to go in and work with those teachers to make this system as strong as it can be. Because 24,000 dead ends out of our high schools every year, 24,000 lives that are going nowhere. Not only is that bad for all 24,000 of them, but it's bad for everybody else. And it puts us in a position where we're playing from behind. And we're trying to from ahead. The other thing we have focused on in this administration, the governor's made a key point, is the idea, I think it was John Kennedy who said, a rising tide lifts all ships. We have 170,000 new jobs in this state over the last 3 years. It's 170,000 families that are stronger, 170,000 homes that are more stable. But there are still a lot of people hurting. And the mentally ill and the addicted will not be forgotten in this state. And we talk about a safety net. We talk about the safety net that has to be there. And it has to be a safety net that encourages people not to land and stay, but to land and climb out, to bounce back, to get back into society, become who they are destined by God to be, to fulfill their entire mission in this life. It's nobody's mission to be out of this society. It's nobody's mission to be on the sideline. But the mentally ill and the addicted need our help. There is a fact sheet on your table on the Start Talking initiative. We know, based on data from experts, that a child, a young person, high school, middle school age, is twice as likely to not use drugs if a parent talks to them about it. Okay? This isn't a big, long speech. This is that 30-second, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? I can remember sitting, this is a true story. I remember sitting one day watching a football game with my dad, and one of those 30-second PSAs came on. It said, talk to your kids about drugs, alcohol, and sex. They'll listen. And he just deadpan looked over at me and says, drugs, no. Alcohol, when you're old enough. Sex, when you're married. That was it. That was the talk. Well, I went to Ohio State, so maybe it was a little bit before 21 of the alcohol. But other than that, listened to him over the years. It doesn't take a whole lot. And we've got to start this conversation. So what you see in the Start Talking initiative that the governor and the First Lady are so focused on is taking all the resources that we've got, right? We've got all these siloed resources that are doing great things. You've got sheriffs and local police that are doing the DARE program. Is DARE talking to mental health? Is mental health talking to the county behavioral services? Are all these agencies working together? And what else can we do? So we've got the 5 minutes for life. This is local law enforcement and the state highway patrol working together to take 5 minutes out of a practice, not even the school day, out of the football team practice or the cheerleading squad practice, and going in and talking to those kids, because kids that are involved in athletics and academic programs and extracurricular activities tend to be leaders in their schools. Go in and talk to them. Make them the leaders to talk to their classmates. Empower them to be mentors to their peers. This makes a difference. Give parents the tools they need and the resources they need, the expertise, to know how to talk about that. Maybe it's a little bit longer talk than the one my dad gave me, but it's not a whole lot more that takes it. And a lot of times all it is demonstrating to that kid that somebody cares, that somebody is watching, and that they matter. It makes them think about whether to pick up that, tablet or that needle or whatever it is. And we know that we make great strides in this state when we put in prescription drug diagnosis, prescribing guidelines that have taken a lot of prescription abuse problems, especially in the southern part of our state. They've taken those away. But where there's a need, where there's a demand, where that devil is sitting on somebody's shoulder all day, all the time, 24/7, driving at that addiction, something fills that vacuum. And right now in Ohio, you think it's only in the inner city or somewhere else. I'm telling you, it's everywhere. It's Dublin, it's Worthington, it's everywhere in this state. Heroin. Heroin is a problem. It is an epidemic. It is not black. It is not white. It is not rich. It is not poor. It is ours. It is everywhere. And we all have to be doing everything we can to fight it at every turn, because it's hurting our families. It's hurting our communities everywhere we go. So I encourage you to take a look at the Start Talking initiative. There's the website there on the bottom. Families are getting involved all over this state. Please consider doing it yourself. I want to stop there. I want to thank you for the opportunity. I would like to entertain questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
What other states are in the financial situation that Ohio is in, where they've maxed out their rainy day fund and have a balanced budget? you know what states they are and how many there are there?
All 49 of the 50 states have a requirement that they balance their budget every year. So 49 of the 50 do have a balanced budget. I think all 50 actually have a balanced budget. As far as the pool rainy day fund, I can't even begin to answer that question. I don't know the answer to that.
Why do we hear about California, which appears to be destitute, out of money, going bankrupt? I mean, is it just news media, or is there accuracy?
I think there's a lot of accuracy to both California and Illinois being on the brink of serious budget instability. And I think it's where we were. If you remember in 2009, 2010, or excuse me, 08, 09, we had the major federal stimulus, and there was a lot of one-time money that came along with that. I think other states have been relying on that one-time money beyond that budget. We said after that, no more one-time money. If we don't have the funds coming in to balance the budget, we've got to make cuts and make changes. Those states that have relied on one-time money, California took that train money that we turned down, if you remember. They're now finding themselves, that $400 billion has bought them billions in problems in trying to keep that construction going. And so now it's, and they even continue that, and they cut that from the budget.
I teach a course at the university in international development, and there's a standard source or resource that I assign my students, an economic freedom index that takes into account regulatory burdens, size of government relative to the economy, and so forth. Earlier this week, I was in a seminar by visiting economists who said there was a similar report for the United States, but looking at different states. And Ohio doesn't rank too well. We're ranked about 40 out of 50 states. And this is a summary presentation, but in part this relates to regulatory burden. In part it also relates to government expenditures by state and local governments relative to the size of the state's economy. We're rather high. It's something like 40%. And from an economic standpoint, then that means that resources that could be used productively in the private sector are instead being soaked up by the state government, local school districts, and so forth. So we're high.
Absolutely.
And so is this a problem that's on the radar screen of the state government? And if so, what's the plan to do something about this?
It absolutely is, and I think that's a great point. You know, we are a state, when you talk to people from other states about Ohio, and we talk about not only how high some of our local income taxes are, but the idea at all that local governments can levy an income tax, that's a foreign concept to a lot of leaders in other states. It's not something that's common across states. But we have, as Ohio's grown into 200 years now of statehood, we have been a state that's relied very heavily on our home rule. We believe very strongly in our 88 counties and our townships and local governments having the power not only to levy tax but provide services at that local level. And I think the question becomes for all of us as we look at that is, how do we reform? How do we think about it? Again, I say, if we were creating it new today, if today were statehood day, not March 1st, 1803, what would Ohio look like? And it would be different. It would absolutely be different. But in the confines and context of the fact that we have our 80 counties, and look, this is not a knock on local governments by any means. Local governments provide a lot of good services, but as we look at the cost of that, and we say, well, what are the services we're paying for, and what do we get out of it? Would it be better on more money in the private sector rather than in the public sector? Is that the way to go? And I think there are some very positive reforms being worked on in the legislature to look at not only the way that the taxes are collected, but how municipal governments work together and share services to try and reduce some of that cost. And also at the state level, we have the smallest state government in terms of workforce that we've had in 35 years in the state. And we have flatlined just about everything except for Medicaid spending. Medicaid spending that had been on track of like 9% per year for the previous decade is now under 3% of growth. So we've brought that level of growth down without cutting services. And I think, if I remember correctly, the study you're referring to, we were 44th a couple of years ago. We're now 40th, so we've made strides. But to your point, good is good, but it's not good enough.
Well, one of the things in this, I remember one additional matter is that several years ago we did away with the tax on equipment and capital and so forth, which, if you think about it, is a crazy tax. I think it was instituted during the 30s.
Yeah, intentional.
So at least that's gone.
Yeah, and we moved to the CAT tax, and that's not the perfect tax either. But I think Reagan was the one who said if you want less of something, tax it. And the idea that we tax income and work, and the idea that we used to tax goods and services in the dealers and intangible tax, that probably was a good thing to step away from. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You touched lightly on attracting business here. Do you feel 5 years from today the programs and where we're at will produce the results that we need in 5 years?
I think that they will. Jobs Ohio has been our major initiative to privatize the way we do economic development in Ohio. And this has taken economic development out of state government where, I'll be candid, bureaucrats like myself who never worked in the boardroom were doing it. That's not a knock on them. 40 years ago when Jim Rhodes went to Japan and brought Honda here, that was like a major coup for Ohio, right? And that's continued to reap benefits in the state and was a great success story. But like anything else, you say, if it worked 40 years ago, does it necessarily work today? And it doesn't. Jobs Ohio is diversifying the way Ohio does economic development. Manufacturing, still a hugely important part of our economy. Agriculture is still the number one industry in the state and will continue to be. But you also have to look at financial services. We have done more to reform the bank taxes, and we've seen banks bring jobs. Chase has brought jobs into Central Ohio from other places because you now have John Miner, who worked on Wall Street in the financial sector, who is now here running Jobs Ohio. So when they get a call, when a CEO gets a call from Jobs Ohio, it's not somebody in state government who's a bureaucrat. It's a colleague of theirs. It's a peer. And they're talking on a peer-to-peer level. The great example of that, in my opinion, and where it may not be 5 years, but I think 10, 15 years down the road, we've got this great shale development in eastern Ohio. Kathy mentioned in her introduction, I'm from Youngstown. Okay? I can remember when there was a steel mill and then there wasn't anymore. Okay? It just was gone one day. And Youngstown arguably still hasn't recovered. I don't even know that it's arguable. It still hasn't recovered. It's a shell of what it was then. So we got this shale development. We know that this is a finite thing. We know that at some point all of the resources that are there will have been extracted from the earth, right? I mean, you get oil, you get gas, and at some point they're all gone. So what's there after that? How do we avoid that boom and bust cycle that coal and steel created in the eastern part of our state? And it's by looking at the corporate headquarters of some of these companies that are in Texas and Oklahoma and saying, hey, you're going to be in Ohio for the next 30, 40, 50 years, hopefully, drilling. Why don't you bring your offices here? We've got a more competitive business climate. We've got a better quality of life. We've got the infrastructure and the airport and everything you need to do your business here, and it'll cost you less. So that when the shale's gone, they're still here. Now, what follows them? Banks, insurance company. So it's creating that environment in Ohio that we're not just reliant on the auto industry. Auto industry is great. Auto jobs are fantastic. We want to build cars here. But if all your eggs are in that basket, and 15 years from now, we're using fuel cells instead of a combustible engine, and combustion engines are what we build, we've got a problem, right? So it's about diversification. And I think Jobs Ohio is working, and I do think in 5 years we'll see a lot of results from that. And sooner than that. Yes, sir.
Back to your original comment about 25,000 high school kids not graduating. What's the governor going to do about that, and what's the answer? I mean, we've talked about this for 50 years.
Yep.
What makes kids want to stay in school? How, if you mentioning as a statistic, what's the governor got any ideas to fix it?
Yeah, well, one of the short-term things is to give the administrators and schools and the teachers a little bit more of a stick that right now kids can walk away before they're 18. We don't want that to happen anymore. We want to change the law so that if you're under 18 and you're not in school, you got to be there. So there are things that we can do, and also to empower the parents to be there. But long-term, you also have to look at the things that make a kid lose interest. Okay, let's go all the way to the third grade. If you leave the third grade to go to the fourth grade and you can't read, you're behind now and you're going to be behind forever. So last year, we passed a third grade reading guarantee. That means every student in this state, when they leave the third grade, knows how to read at the third grade level. If you can't learn to read, you're not going to read to learn, right? So we are giving teachers, we are giving administrators the tools and the support they need, not to hold that kid back. That's not the goal of the third grade reading guarantee, to say, you can't read, you're staying here until you can. It's to get them that intervention they need early on. Okay, it's the idea that you have small kid, small problem, big kid, big problem. Catch it early. Make that change early on. Give them the tools they need so that when they leave for the 4th grade, they're able to go in and learn. That is one of the steps to that. Secondly, vocational education and job training. Right now that starts in the 9th grade. It should go into the 7th grade. It should go deeper in so that kids have more opportunities to follow their path, to give teachers the tools they need, to not create one lesson plan that fits all 20 or 30 students, but to be able to think about what that lesson plan is for each kid. You always have kids that you know are going to be good. But then teachers know that there's other ones that they need more tools, more resources for. So we have the Straight A Fund. This is $350 million set aside for the best ideas brought forward by superintendents, principals, and teachers to fund unique, out-of-the-box ways to help kids get the resources they need. The answer isn't to throw more money at the problem, but the answer is to fund the things that work, and we're trying to find those things that work. We're not going to solve it overnight. These are problems that you mentioned that have been around for a long time. They're going to be around for a lot longer, but we've got to take every step we can to try and address them. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You brought up the issue of income tax, and several years ago, many years ago, the Supreme Court declared that the method of funding schools in Ohio was unconstitutional because it over-relied on property taxes. Now, the legislature, for all those years, has been thumbing its nose at that declaration, and now this last change in the income tax only made it worse. When you withdrew that 12.5% rollback, when you got rid of the homestead exemption for people making more than $30,000. Now, I haven't been touched for several reasons, because we passed a levy in Worthington before this was done, and I'm only down to being gratified on the other thing. But if you make, and then the sales tax, if you make $50,000 a year in a family, you will get no benefit from that count. In fact, you will be paying more. We have an increase in the sales tax on utilities, with the heating and everything going on that way. It doesn't pay for people making around $50,000 a year. I make a few dollars. Okay. And most people here will also.
We also have, in state income law, through the budget that was passed last year for the first time ever, an earned income tax credit at the state level for lower income Ohioans. So now work pays. That had never existed before. And so that is why groups like the Ohio Association of Food Banks supported us. I understand what you're saying about the property tax rollback and everything. All I can say to that is, in the last budget, we put $1.6 billion into education, including the Straight A Fund. It's more dollars than were in education in 2008 before the bottom out. So we could debate tax policy. I think our approach is always going to be to have more people paying a lower rate, because that's how you grow the pot. If we only worry about the 11.6 million.